We're reinventing family conversations that we may never have had in our families before, and we may need to start saying the quiet parts, the conversations about money, inheritance, fear out loud and on purpose so that everyone is protected, everyone is on the same page, and we can move forward with our multi-gen plans with love and with respect and with clarity. Welcome to Home After 50. I'm Julie Ford. And this is a show about reimagining what life can look like in this next chapter. Here we explore home, family, reinvention, and the evolving ways that women after 50 are shaping lives that are meaningful, grounded, and true. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome back to Home After 50. This season, we've been talking about reinvention, and we've been talking about reinventing ourselves, our lives, our businesses, our stories. But today I want to talk with you about reinventing our homes, because this is something that I talk about all the time, especially how it relates to multi-generational living. And I just got off a Zoom with 17 people from across the country who are all either living multi-gen lives or planning multi-gen homes. And we all came together on my monthly multi-gen coffee chat. This is something that I do every month. It's free. Anyone is welcome to join us. I just open up my Zoom room, and anyone who wants to talk about anything related to multi-generational living can come on, ask questions, share ideas. One of the things I love most about it is not only am I there in the room to answer questions, to help families with ideas, to problem solve together, but the other people in the room are all at various stages of multi-generational living and are so generous and wise with what they contribute to the conversation as well. So today, I want to share with you the 5 themes that came up on this call, because really everyone there is in a season of reimagining and reinventing home for themselves in one way or another. And it looks different for everyone. You know, after more than 10,000, I think actually we might be close to 12,000 people have downloaded my multi-generational living guide. There are so many conversations happening, both in the emails coming back to me with people sharing their stories, in the comment sections on all of my social media platforms. And what I have learned over time listening to family stories is that there are as many ways of doing multi-generational living as there are different families and different types of people. And that's the beauty of it. It doesn't have to just look one way. So today, and I will be referring to my notes. If you're watching me on YouTube, you're going to see both Louie, my 13-year-old whippet, sleeping behind me, and me glancing at my notes, because I don't want to miss anything. I really want to share with you what came up on this call today. So let's get into it. We had 17 people on the call, 18 including me, from 8 different states across the country, which was really kind of cool. So let me share with you where people called in from. We had people from, maybe it was 7 states: Massachusetts, California, Georgia, Oregon, South Carolina, Iowa, New York, and Montana. Lots of people in California, actually, but really all over the country. And this happens every time I host one of these calls. The kinds of things that we started talking about: one, we were talking about ADUs, and we were talking about how different states have done different things to help people figure out how to make ADUs more possible. But some states are doing a better job at that than others. So you may have heard me talk about Massachusetts before. We had something put in place in early 2025 called the Affordable Homes Act. And one of the things that it did was made ADUs a right, a legal right across the state in every city and town. So there's some, guidelines to that, some restrictions to that. Of course, you still have to meet building codes and setbacks, but essentially it removed a big barrier of every individual city and town making the rules and allowing more ADUs to be built, which is increasing the housing supply and making multi-gen living more accessible for everyone. California is another state who I understand has done a lot. Some people on the call were sharing that in California, up to 3 ADUs could be allowed per single family property. I'm not deeply familiar with those guidelines in California. So if you live in California and you want to look into that, please do your own research and investigation. But they do seem to be on the cutting edge of allowing a lot more in California. And then there was a woman on the call from Oregon who is interested in building an ADU and shared that mostly Oregon, this is her perspective, tends to implement laws right behind California and sort of seems to follow them. So she's keeping a close eye on California to see what may be allowed soon in Oregon. Now, on the flip side of that, there was one attendee there in San Diego County, California, who hit some fire safety restrictions that are so hard that he actually changed his plan and is making a home addition instead of an ADU. And then there was another person from South Carolina who found that size limits were so restrictive that they choked out the option entirely. In her case, and I don't know what town this was, I'm not really sure what municipalities or state guidelines are running the regulations there. But in her particular case, she was trying to look into adding an ADU to her son's property, and his home was 1,000 square feet. And she would only be allowed to build an ADU that was 10% of the square footage of the primary home, which would be 100 square feet, which was not going to work. So I don't know if that's the case all across South Carolina. If you're from South Carolina, I'd love to hear from you, what you're running into there. Actually, if you know of regulations anywhere that you're from in the country and want to write in and share those with me, I would love to hear what your experience has been and what's going on in your state and your towns. You can always email me at julie@julieford.com. I'm very interested to hear what's going on across the country. But the takeaway for listeners, I think, and for people on the coffee chat today was that before you fall in love with a plan and your idea of how you want to create a multi-generational home, you've really got to get to know your local zoning code and the rules so that you don't get your heart set on a project that can't work. Another thing we talked about was how ADUs were potentially increasing property values for everybody as properties that are well suited to multi-generational living are becoming more and more in demand. And I completely agree with that. So the reinvention takeaway from this first theme of ADUs that we talked about on the coffee chat was that we're reinventing what a single family lot can hold. And one house is potentially becoming a small family village. And I love that. Our second theme that came up on the multi-gen coffee chat today is that the kitchen is the hotspot. And if you've been following me for a while, or you've downloaded any of my guides, followed my posts on social media, you have seen me talk about this before. The kitchen is the place where things either work out or don't in a multi-gen home, depending on what families are able to structure, agree to for boundaries, or build. And there was one grandmother on the call, was 27 months into living with her daughter's family after a health crisis brought them all together. And they were actually really enjoying living together. There were so many things about it that were working well, even in a small home. They were only struggling with one big thing, and that was sharing a kitchen. So the group kind of crowdsourced some creative solutions because some people there were already living in multi-gen situations that were set up differently than hers. One of the fixes was potentially having a closet converted into like a mini kitchen with a microwave, maybe a convection microwave and a small refrigerator. Someone talked about turning a full basement into a small temporary apartment. This woman's husband was hesitant to move down there. He didn't want to go to the basement. I get that. They are actually looking at doing a bigger build down the road, but that's probably a year and a half away. So we were really talking about what were temporary solutions that wouldn't make them feel rushed into building a second home on their property so that they could continue to live in this situation that currently has a shared kitchen in a better way for everyone. So setting up like a small mini kitchen somewhere in the house seemed like a really appealing idea to her. And this idea of second kitchen solutions as stepping stones and not necessarily permanent solutions was really appealing. People were talking a lot about designing for what's coming down the road and not just who's here now. And the reinvention takeaway from this part of the conversation is that reinventing the kitchen is really reinventing the heart of the home and how families relate together, because autonomy and togetherness really have to learn how to function in a multi-gen home in a kitchen, just because, listen, we eat multiple times a day. Everyone's eating different things. Everyone has different ways they cook. Everyone has different ways they clean. It can really be a hotspot. So if you're in that situation of navigating a shared kitchen, maybe start to think about, could you come up with an interim solution that's maybe not your perfect long-term fix, but that could help create like a second cooking zone that might make this a little bit easier to navigate. Okay, the third theme that came up was talk to your family before you talk to an attorney. Now, if you've been with me for a while, you know I always recommend that you legalize your agreements in your multi-gen home, that you need an estate attorney. You've got to get things in writing and you've got to get them legally documented. This is the most loving thing you can do for your family. However, I've also talked about this aspect a lot. Sometimes you need to have a lot deeper conversations with your family, either during the conversations, in addition to the conversations you're having with your family estate attorney, or before you go to talk to an estate attorney, because estate attorneys are very well equipped to help you legalize your agreements, but they're not necessarily going to help you navigate the emotional complexities of the conversations that need to be had in order to decide what those legal agreements are going to be. Now, no shade on you if you're an estate attorney who does this. As a matter of fact, if you are an estate attorney who does guide families through those complex emotional parts of the conversation, I want to know about you. So please reach out to me, because you'll probably be the first estate attorney I would refer to. But for the most part, I think we need to face as families that there are lengthy, sometimes challenging conversations about hard topics that need to happen before we legalize our agreements. So the hard topics that nobody wants to bring up, and probably this is the number one topic that comes up, is what happens to an inheritance when only one adult child lives in the multi-gen home. So what do the non-resident siblings get? How do we make things fair? And fair doesn't always mean equal. I say this a lot too. If one adult child is making a contribution to the household, is making a contribution to caring for an aging parent, fair in whatever might be left over from an aging parent's estate once they've passed may not be 50-50 between two adult children, or 25, 25, 25, 25 between four of them. Fair needs to be discussed and figured out among the family, and preferably before you're in a multi-gen situation. If you're already in one, it's not too late. You can still talk about that, but it does need to be discussed. My own family's experience, I've talked about this many times before. We had this conversation right up front, and it was so good to just have that done. And again, it's a gift to the people you love to have these conversations early. So the key point, I think, that was the takeaway from this part of the conversation is that these are not one and done conversations. Needs change in families over time, whether you're multi-gen or not, and you need to revisit the conversations. So the reinvention takeaway from this theme of talking with your family before you talk to an estate attorney is that we're reinventing family conversations that we may never have had in our families before. And we may need to start saying the quiet parts, the conversations about money, inheritance, fear out loud and on purpose, so that everyone is protected, everyone is on the same page, and we can move forward with our multi-gen plans with love and with respect and with clarity. The fourth theme that came up was ownership as protection, not just paperwork. So we had great conversations with some people on the call about how they're talking with their financial planners about bringing their adult children into their homes as equity partners. So one household has the younger couple paying for utilities now and earning equity ownership over time through their contributions to the home. One of the things that this addressed for this family, and I loved this point, was that they were creating this multi-generational home together. It was great for all the generations in the home, especially financially. But initially, before they had this part of the conversation, the young adult generation was feeling a little bit like, hey, all of our friends are buying their own homes, building equity, beginning to build their own wealth. And we're not really doing that in this situation. So the conversation about becoming equity partners in the home really opened up a conversation for the younger generation to begin to build wealth, build equity, and kind of have the best of both worlds. To be honest with you, they're building their own financial well-being and helping their parents, and all coming together to afford more together than they could apart. So that was a theme that everybody really loved talking a little bit more about today. There was another conversation we had that I think I may do a whole episode about an aging parent owning part of a house, and how that ownership could actually become a risk if Medicaid bills came to be a necessity later on in life for their care. Now, caveat here, I am not an attorney. This is what estate planning conversations with estate planning attorneys need to talk about, need to focus on. I would love to have an attorney, an estate planning attorney, preferably an elder law attorney, on the podcast soon to talk about this aspect, because it is a conversation about asset protection and careful planning with aging and care that I think we need to all be having, especially around multi-generational living, because when you are combining assets with family, you've got to consider the potential risks involved with that as well. So to be continued on that, but it is something to be aware of. Other tools that came up, financing tools that came up in our theme of ownership as protection, were senior home equity lines of credit. There's new HELOCs available for seniors that we want to explore in more depth. I'm thinking I'll probably have my mortgage partner, Michael Pankow, and I do another multi-gen financing workshop and dive a little deeper into that aspect of things. And then we were talking about how I really think we're going to see more creative solutions. And I think there are some out there that I'd like to learn a little bit more about. More creative funding and financing solutions for multi-generational living, because this is only going to continue to grow. There was also a real estate broker on the call, actually a couple of real estate brokers on the call who are multi-gen, living in multi-gen families themselves. One of them has lived in a multi-gen home for 35 years. So this is actually not new, right? There just weren't that many of us talking about multi-gen living until very recently, but people have been living this way for decades. So it was really fun to have her on the call as well. The reinvention takeaway from this theme of ownership as protection was that we're reinventing the deed itself, inheritance as a living arrangement and not just a document that we don't, that we tuck away in a safe or in a safety deposit box or with our attorney and don't ever talk about again. When we're living multi-generationally, when needs are changing, when families are making different levels of contribution, we've got to be having these conversations all the time. And finally, our fifth theme from the coffee chat today was it can be overwhelming, and that is completely normal. I think everyone on the call admitted that some of this process of figuring out multi-generational living can be quite overwhelming because there are so many aspects to it: the personal, the financial, the care needs, the physical, the logistic of the homes themselves. There's a lot to consider. And I think the most honest moment of the call was when someone who's almost turning 65 was saying that, the whole process feels overwhelming because it is complex, that she's got to be considering everything all at once, as well as considering her own aging process, upcoming retirement, and health needs. I think the reframe on this is, what is that expression? You don't have to boil the ocean, right? You can take this one step at a time. So we did talk on the call a little bit about sequencing multi-generational living planning. And where I suggest you begin is with family alignment. Getting clarity, number one, on what your family wants, what the vision is for your multi-generational living situation. And I don't even say home, because it could be a compound, it could be multiple homes on the same property. There's so many different ways to do this. But getting clarity around your vision, getting clarity around your money, on resources that different family members can bring to the table. And then when you've got your family on the same page, then getting your professional team in place, because you are going to need professionals to support you. You're definitely going to need an estate planning attorney. It would be great to have a financial planner. Sometimes you'll need a real estate agent if there's any buying or selling of real estate involved in this plan that you're executing. Sometimes you might need a builder. Sometimes you might even need a care manager for an aging parent. There are so many professionals that are available to support you with this, but getting on the same page as a team, as a family, is where you really begin. And then you can begin to bring in the professionals that can help you navigate things, and really sooner rather than later, because you may find that you can get some very good input from each of the professionals as you're in the planning phase. So the takeaway here is that reinvention happens at your own pace. A renovation can happen one room at a time. A whole life redo for a multi-generational family can also happen one conversation at a time, one professional at a time, one family meeting at a time, even one house at a time. I know some families are, building or purchasing one home and then gradually over time adding other homes or ADUs or additions to their property to accommodate more family members as needs change, as young adults maybe come back home, as aging parents need more care. So to close out today, I know that was a lot, but there were just so many great things that came up on the coffee chat that I wanted to share with you. I will be holding another coffee chat next month. I do this every month. I've been doing it since, I can't remember. I think the first one was last December. So we're probably coming up on like 8 months of coffee chats. I'll have another one in August. It's usually the last Friday of the month. Make sure you're on my email list. You can go to my website, juliford.com/multi-gen. All of my multi-gen resources are there, including my free guides, a couple of paid guides that you can access if you want to go deeper. There is a scheduling button there to book a free clarity call with me if you're at the point where you want to talk through your family situation. And you can also get on my email list for my Sunday notes that go out every Sunday morning, where I share with you any events that we have coming up, like our multi-gen coffee chats or our multi-gen finance workshops. And I also share an inside view of what's going on in life and home, the marketplace, and caring for aging parents, everything that I think all of us who are thinking about reimagining home after 50 are thinking about these days. Thanks so much for being here. I will see you next time. Thanks so much for joining me for this week's episode of Home After 50. If this episode resonated with you, please make sure you're following and subscribing so you never miss a thing. And you can find more resources at my website, juliford.com. See you next time.